Most marine diesels never come close to lasting long enough to matter. Modern high-speed blocks are rated for maybe 10 to 20,000 hours before a major overhaul, and most recreational owners never even get there before trading the boat in, or the boat itself wears out first. But there is a small, specific list of marine diesel engines with documented, independently verified service records that cross 100,000 hours in a working lifetime, some of them multiple times over. That is not a marketing number, and it is not a single lucky engine somebody kept babying in a heated shop. That is decades of commercial operators, towboat captains, and Alaskan fishermen running these exact blocks into the ground and rebuilding them instead of replacing them over and over, because replacing them was never actually necessary. There are exactly 7 engines that earned that record. Number 1 has been powering the largest ships on Earth for over a century, and it is still the design every serious marine engineer measures everything else against. 3 things end most marine diesels early: high piston speed, engines that rev hard wear out rings, bearings, and cylinder walls per hour, far faster than a slow-turning block ever will, regardless of horsepower. Raw seawater passing directly through the block, salt water in contact with internal iron and copper passages corrodes them from the inside long before the exterior shows a problem. And dry, non-replaceable cylinder liners, once a bore wears past its final oversize on a dry liner engine, the block itself is scrap, while a wet liner design can be brought back to factory specification indefinitely. Every engine on this list solved at least 2 of these 3. Starting with number 7. Number 7. Perkins has built marine engines in Peterborough, England, for more than 85 years, and the resume is almost absurd. Sir Francis Chichester chose a Perkins 4107 as auxiliary power for his solo circumnavigation aboard Gypsy Moth in 1966, later saying he had 0 worries about its reliability. Che Blythe chose the same engine in 1972 for his solo non-stop voyage against the prevailing winds and currents. RAF Air Sea Rescue launches ran Perkins power through the 1940s. The Thames River Police fleet of 38 boats ran nothing but Perkins through the 1950s, and the Royal Navy's midget submarine, HMS Stickleback, used a Perkins engine as well. The construction reason behind that resume is simple: wet, replaceable cylinder liners that let a rebuild return the engine to original factory tolerance instead of slowly boring the block oversize until it can't be bored again. Owners on marine forums routinely report well past 20,000 hours on original bottom ends with nothing more than scheduled oil changes. Number 6. Lugger marine diesels. Lugger engines, built by Alaska Diesel Electric out of Seattle since 1975, exist because founder Harold Johnson understood exactly what Alaskan salmon fishermen actually needed: an engine that would not strand a single-engine boat 200 miles from the nearest dock. Instead of designing a marine block from scratch, Lugger took proven industrial diesel platforms, John Deere, Komatsu, and others, and marinized them specifically for continuous duty, with gear-driven raw and fresh water pumps, so there is no rubber belt waiting to snap at the worst possible moment. Wet cylinder liners are individually replaceable for a full rebuild without touching the rest of the block. Commercial operators and marine mechanics on boating forums consistently cite 30 to 40,000 hours between major overhauls on these blocks, and Alaskan fishing boats running 2 seasons a year for 4 decades routinely stack multiple rebuild cycles past the 100,000 hour mark over a working lifetime. Number 5. The Cummins 855, in its big cam configuration, built from the late 1970s through the late 1980s across 4 successive generations, became the default engine of America's inland towboat industry, the vessels that push barge tows up and down the Mississippi and Ohio River systems, essentially around the clock. That duty cycle is the whole story. A towboat engine can log more hours in a single year of continuous river work than a recreational boat logs in 2 decades, and the 855 was built specifically to survive that punishment, with a cast iron block, replaceable wetliners, and a torque curve tuned for pushing loaded barges at low RPM rather than chasing top speed. Towboat operators have run these blocks through repeated in-frame overhauls for over 40 years, rebuilding the same physical block generation after generation, and the river towing industry still considers a well-maintained big cam one of the most rebuildable diesels ever put in a hull. Number 4. The Caterpillar 3412, a turbocharged V12 putting out anywhere from 500 to over 1400 horsepower depending on configuration, has spent decades as the standard engine for tugboats, commercial fishing vessels between 80 and 140 feet, and workboats that simply cannot afford downtime. Vessels built in the 1980s and 1990s on original 3412 engines are still running today, 25 to 40 years later. And large marine and industrial fleets running these blocks at 3,000 to 5,000 hours a year push straight past the 100,000 hour mark within a couple of decades of continuous commercial service. The V12 configuration spreads load across more cylinders at a given horsepower than a smaller inline block would need, which keeps individual cylinder stress lower across the exact same output. Feel free to subscribe if this is of use. Number 3. Detroit Diesel Series 71. Built from 1938 to 1995, a 57-year production run longer than almost any diesel engine in history, the Series 71, nicknamed the Screaming Jimmy for the whine of its Roots-type supercharger, powered World War II landing craft, tanks, and eventually thousands of commercial fishing boats and towboats across the world through its gray marine and Detroit diesel variants. Islanders in the South Pacific were still running World War II-era 671s decades after delivery, some limping along on fewer than their full cylinder count because parts were hard to come by, and the engines kept running anyway. The two-stroke Uniflow design is mechanically simple by nature, firing twice as often per revolution as a comparable four-stroke, and completing a full power cycle with every downstroke, with fewer moving parts overall to fail than an equivalent four-stroke design. Owners and mechanics in the marine and trucking world report factory parts support for the Series 71 is expected to remain available for decades yet, a direct reflection of how many are still working today, more than half a century after the design first went into production. Number 2. Gardner Marine Diesels. L. Gardner and Sons of Manchester, England, built every single marine diesel by hand, one engineer per engine, using a manufacturing philosophy closer to a watchmaker than an assembly line. Gardner engines powered some of the small private boats that crossed the English Channel during the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940, and the Royal Navy's X-class and XE-class midget submarines ran Gardner 4LK engines through the Second World War. The defining engineering decision was rated speed. Gardner engines turn at a fraction of the RPM of a typical high-speed marine diesel, which directly controls piston speed, the single biggest variable in how fast an engine wears out internally. Commercial fishing captains and marine mechanics widely report Gardner blocks running tens of thousands of hours, and in properly maintained cases, hundreds of thousands of hours, without a major failure, a documented reputation that makes the Gardner nameplate close to mythical among anyone who has actually run one offshore. In 1986, Perkins purchased L. Gardner and Sons outright, folding the two philosophies together under one roof before emissions regulations eventually ended Gardner production in the mid-1990s. And finally, at the very top of the marine diesel world sit the slow-speed, two-stroke crosshead engines built by MAN B and W and Sulzer, now under Wärtsilä, the engines that power the overwhelming majority of the world's container ships, bulk carriers, and tankers. These are not small blocks. Some run at speeds as low as 60 to 200 revolutions per minute, A piston speed so low it fundamentally changes the wear equation compared to anything running at recreational marine revolutions per minute. The crosshead design itself is the real innovation, physically separating the combustion side of the piston from the crankcase lubrication side, so that cylinder oil and crankcase oil never mix, and each does its own job without contamination. Cylinder lubrication is metered independently to each cylinder rather than shared with the crankcase oil, and modern piston running technology has pushed the interval between major piston overhauls out to 3 years or more of continuous operation. A container ship running nearly around the clock for a 20 to 25-year working life accumulates well past 100,000 hours on the same engine as a matter of routine, not as an exception, which is exactly why every other engine on this list is, in some way, still chasing the same design philosophy these giants perfected first. Here's why these 7 made the list and nearly every other marine diesel didn't. First, low piston speed. Every engine here either turned slowly by design or was specifically detuned for torque over RPM, and piston speed is the single strongest predictor of how many hours an engine survives before it needs a rebuild. Second, rebuildability. Every one of these uses wet replaceable cylinder liners or an equivalent design that lets a full rebuild return the engine to original factory tolerance instead of slowly running out of material to work with. Third, simplicity. Mechanical fuel systems, cast iron blocks, and a minimum of failure-prone accessories mean fewer parts standing between routine maintenance and total failure. And fourth, documented commercial duty cycles. Every engine here has decades of independent, verifiable operating history from towboat companies, fishing fleets, and shipping lines, not a manufacturer's lab estimate. So if you're looking at a used boat and want to know whether the diesel sitting in the bilge has any of that in it, check a few things before you sign anything. Pull the maintenance log and look specifically for documented in-frame overhauls, not just oil changes, since a rebuilt bottom end tells you the engine was maintained toward a full working life instead of run until it failed and then patched. Ask whether the engine is raw water cooled or fresh water cooled through a heat exchanger or keel cooler, since raw seawater running directly through an engine block is corroding it internally the entire time it's not being run, regardless of how good the exterior paint looks. Check the rated RPM against the horsepower and displacement, since a low number relative to the engine's size almost always signals a slower turning, longer lived design philosophy rather than a high-strung one. And find out whether the block uses wet or dry cylinder liners, because that single detail determines whether this engine has one working life left in it or several more after this one. These 7 engines prove the formula works decade after decade in boats that couldn't afford for it not to. Everything else about the specific engine in front of you is a variable you can actually go check yourself.